Okay, today I'm going to explain to you ISO in hopefully less than 6 minutes, okay? I'm going to get straight to the point. I'm going to explain to you 4 different or 5 different scenarios, why you need to use ISO, what it means out in the field, and the most use you're going to get for it, okay? So first thing is, let's understand the camera, okay? I'm on a Nikon D750. Let's identify 3 things that are influenced and adjusted by ISO, okay? So right here is going to be your shutter speed, right here is going to be your aperture, right here is going to be your ISO. One thing to note, these 3 items all work in conjunction with each other, okay? So if I adjust this variable, the ISO, if I adjust this variable, the shutter speed, or if I adjust this variable, the aperture, the adjustments will be displayed on my exposure line, okay? My light line. So this is going to show you right here the plus, the minus, and the perfect exposure and the center of it, okay? So for example, if I adjust my shutter speed and I make it slower, I'm now getting closer to being overexposed. See how it moves? But if I increase my shutter speed, I'm now moving closer to being underexposed. So theoretically, based off this current situation that my camera is looking at, if I want to be perfectly exposed, okay, at this shutter speed, at this aperture, my camera is going to require an ISO of 3200 to be perfectly exposed, okay? Now let's get to let's define ISO real quick, and I use it as an example of scenario as marriage, okay? So let's pretend that the shutter is the husband, the aperture is the wife, okay? Let's pretend that, they're not perfectly exposed, right? Let's say that, they're not syncing up, they're not exposed, and they need to get back to where they need to be, right? So let's call the ISO the therapist. So if we're going to adjust and get them back, we need to adjust the ISO and decrease it. And as we decrease it, you will see it's perfectly exposed now, right? Now, I want you to think about this from a natural standpoint, okay? So the lower the ISO, the less grain or the less noise that's in the photo. And I always keep mine around 100, all right? The higher the ISO, the more grainier the photo is, right? So let's look at this from a quality standpoint. Let's say I want the best quality, the no noise, no grain in my photo, right? I want an ISO 100. Well, you can see the shutter speed and the aperture are not syncing up, right? So currently this shot is not perfectly exposed. So you have to ask yourself, what variables can I adjust? Should I adjust my aperture? Should I adjust my shutter speed? Or should I adjust my ISO? Well, we've already determined, let's say that I'm taking a picture of a mountain hilltop. We've already determined that I don't want to adjust this. I don't want any grain in my photo. So therefore, there's only 2 variables I can adjust, shutter speed or aperture, in order to get this back to where it needs to be, right? So, for example, I know that if I'm shooting a mountain or a hilltop, I'm probably going to want more than an f4 for my aperture. I probably want to go f11, okay? So if I'm doing f11, right, that means I don't want to change that now. I want that to stay and I want this to stay. Therefore, that concludes I can only adjust one variable, which is my shutter speed, to get it perfectly exposed. So I'm trying to take a picture of this mountain. So let's go ahead and have a longer shutter speed until I can get perfectly exposed. Boom. So what this tells me is, in order for me to capture, in this lighting situation, a mountain with this aperture and only having an ISO 100, it's going to require a 3-second shutter speed. Well, you and I both know there's no way I can do that without being on a tripod. Second scenario, well, you're going to say, okay, I want to take a picture of that mountaintop, but at the same time, I don't have a tripod. So what's the most optimal photo settings I can get to take that with just holding it in my hand? Well, let's say, I know I can let's start with my shutter speed. I know for a fact I can at least get away and focus without blurring my photo at 1/125. That's a good shutter speed for me to hold with my hand. Well, I know that I can do f11, that's the aperture I still want. Well, if I don't want to adjust this variable, and I'm underexposed, what's my last variable I can adjust? That's correct, ISO. So now I need to adjust this back to a higher ISO. Oof, that's high. adjust, actually, let's say my shutter speed was 1/100, just for this scenario purpose. So that's going to require super high ISO, right? So that's going to be a super grainy photo, but it's going to be required in order for me to use this shutter speed with this aperture to be perfectly exposed. I have to have this ISO. See? Now let's use one more scenario. Let's use the sports scenario, okay? Let's say you say, well, I'm on a monopod and I know for a fact, okay, that I do not need f11. I actually want it wide open. I want to let as much light in, so I want f4. And I know, however, that these football players are running really fast, and I need a quicker shutter speed than this, because otherwise the photo is going to be blurry. So I need to go to, let's say, 1/400. That's what I'm going to have so I can capture those football players without, having them blur through my image. Well, currently it says I'm overexposed. So I got to reduce my ISO. Okay, so that's what's going to be required now in order to be perfectly exposed with this shutter speed at this aperture. Now, one more thing to keep in mind. Let's say that you're going, well, I don't have time to sit here on the back of my camera and consistently adjust my ISO all the time. In fact, I just want to be worried about two variables. Actually, just one variable, which is just my shutter speed. Okay? Well, that's where auto ISO comes in. If you don't care about the grain, you don't care about the ISO, and all you're caring about is just your shutter speed or your aperture, but you don't care necessarily about this, you hold down your ISO button and you'll click it to ISO auto sensitivity control on. Now, for example, as I adjust my shutter speed, you can see the ISO is automatically adjusting itself. So then you might say to me, well, why would you not always leave it on auto ISO, right? Why would you just not leave it on auto ISO all the time? Well, here's why. If you're, again, going back to my mountain scenario, if you're trying to get the best quality photo that you can get of, like, let's say landscape, and you don't care much about having to adjust the aperture, the shutter speed, because you're on a tripod, then you need to put this all the way down to 100, because that's going to give you the best quality possible. Again, remember, the higher the ISO, the more grainier the photo is.